Pacific is, or the area is in terms of maybe the population, 60% of world's population, in terms of the maritime trade, the merchandise trade, close to 50%, 60% of the GDP. And on the other side, you have India with all that goes with its rising status in the world stage. You have a thriving economy and a number of related issues. You have technological advancements, you have the demographic dividend and the rest of it. So I think in my opinion, there is a synchrony here.
Mm-hmm.
And it is thereafter for us in terms of, and we can talk of opportunities, threats and challenges later, but perhaps in the context of the Indo-Pacific, I think we can look at it as India's moment in the sun. And it is now for us to how we leverage these opportunities that present ourselves in the current context. If you look at the Indo-Pacific, and more specifically the Indian Ocean region, again, in terms of the maritime trade, the sea lines of communication, India's geostrategic location is something which, again, gives us that edge. What has been our stance as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned? I think it has been very well articulated in terms of what the government, what the MEA has been doing for last decade or so. We don't look at it as a theater which is exclusive to certain nations, but something which is of importance, which is of significance for the immediate countries in the immediate geography, as well as those which are outside.
So just a mic a little closer.
Oh,
so.
yeah. So, I mean, these were my initial thoughts when you look at India and the Indo-Pacific. Coming to the, shall we say, what are the threats or challenges as far as the Indo-Pacific goes? Of course, what comes to mind straight away is the rivalry between the two superpowers, that is the China and the US. And both seem to have a different approach to where they look at Indo-Pacific. On one hand, you have China, which is looking at a global civilizational initiative in terms of GSI, the Global Development Initiative, whereas the US is looking at this region in terms of a liberal international order. There's also a hypothesis or argument that China is looking at this area in terms of mutual benefits, whereas the US looks at it in terms of mutually acceptable, recognizable values in this region. What we need to be, so while this rivalries or the rivalry goes on, it's also argued or talked about contestation, conflict or competition. We need to be careful that this contestation doesn't transcend into conflict. And I think that is where our role as a preeminent, shall I say, stakeholder in this region comes into play for a number of reasons. You also mentioned about aggressiveness, assertiveness of China, and I need not again elaborate on in terms of what China is doing, be it the South China Sea, be it the East China Sea, in terms of coercive economic, shall we say, aggression, and a number of other things challenging the established international laws in the maritime domain as well as on the land domain. There are a number of hotspots. We are not looking at only Taiwan, but number of other places. In fact, I read someone say that, look, is South China Sea going to be the next Persian Gulf with the kind of resources that are available and the kind of contestation, the kind of interest. So this is what, in terms of, I would say, the threats and challenges are. And there is also this aspect of people look at Indo-Pacific as a binary. So either you're on this side or on the other side. Now this is where again I feel there is a good opportunity for India to step up. The smaller and the larger countries, not only in the Indo-Pacific, around the world, expect India to play a more proactive and a more, shall I say, assertive role here in different fields. And I think that is what we again have to look at. Besides the conventional threats, there are a whole lot of other threats which are again manifesting in this region, be it in terms of regional rivalries, be it in terms of Islamic fundamentalism in certain areas, cross-border trafficking, of human trafficking as well as drug trafficking. There is competition for resources. So, and it is not only in the conventional domain, you also have now challenges in the non-conventional domains of cyber, which again I feel in the future as we move forward, they're going to be becoming increasingly relevant. And these threats and challenges transcend across borders, and it is not only limited to security, but certain other areas as well. So the question I think we need to look at is this contestation going to intensify? The arc of conflict which currently we see in the Middle East, I mean, is it going to be sort of further spreading into the Indo-Pacific? If yes, by when and how do we deal with that kind of a situation? So these were some of the threats. And if I were now to look at the opportunities for us, I mentioned about the rising India, our strengths. I need not again elaborate here. Indo-Pacific itself, the kind of economic activity, the kind of economic center of gravity, if you will, much of the Europe is again pivoting here. Attention of the EU, the European nations is again focused in this region for obvious reasons. And the resources here itself hold immense potential. So therefore, I think with this convergence of India's status as well as the opportunities that provide, I think you can call it a maybe an theater of opportunity for us sitting here in Delhi. And it is now for us to see how best we can leverage. And there are a number of ways you can do it, be it in terms of our strategic engagements with our countries through various mechanisms, various fora we already have in place. I think there is scope for us to further strengthen them. You still have to look at as to how do you guardrail the weaponization in terms of these situations. So that is something which again, in my opinion, is going to be crucial. There are avenues. I mentioned about the India Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which we need to further strengthen on. There are 7 areas, if I recall, which have been identified, how you can further build on that. Maritime domain awareness, we have seen as to what the Indian Navy has been doing in the Red Sea, in the Arabian Sea. Now this is another area as to what role must or can the Indian Navy play in the Indo-Pacific in terms of its capacity building, capability development, how do you move towards it. Military diplomacy, since you asked me specifically as to what can military do, right. I believe there is tremendous scope for us to engage at the military level, be it in terms of ideation, having number of events. We recently, if some of you would recall, had the Indo-Pacific Army Chief Seminar. You had chiefs from almost 32 countries, besides the Indo-Pacific, other parts of the world. So these are the areas where we need to look at. Defense production. We have a good, vibrant shipbuilding industry. So how is it, and some of the smaller nations in the Indo-Pacific, perhaps they can look at our capability and how that can be leveraged. So these are some of the areas I thought as my initial remarks as to how India can leverage its position, and perhaps I find this is the right time or the right period for us to play our role well. And I think this recognition, this acceptance, this understanding is there across all domains. And we in the military, and when I say military, not only the army, but the Air Force and the Navy, we are wanting and doing our bit as to how we can move forward in those directions. So I think I'll stop here with my initial comments.
Thank you, General. And I think that's a superb overview, which sets the tone for the discussions to follow. The General is very kindly, he's really limited for time, but he has agreed. You'll stay. Wonderful. Wonderful. A couple of questions, General, before we move to our next speaker. We have, of course, identified China as one of our major threats that's there, and we've seen the way China has been modernizing its army. They say by 2035, the PLA will get into what they call military-civil fusion with informatized and intelligence-sized forces, with, of course, the C4ISR kind of command, control, communications, computer intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. It has also set up a Western theater command and primarily directed towards India to defend itself against India. So what is India doing to counter such moves? How are we modernizing the Indian army to meet the challenge that China poses to us?
So modernization, infusion of technology, leveraging disruptive niche technologies for military use is one of the areas out of the 5 fundamental foundational pillars of transformation that we have laid out for ourselves. And in this modernization, technology is extremely critical, and this is what we picked up as one of the other lessons from the ongoing conflicts the world over. So we need to be able to identify as to how future conflicts will play out, and how you can leverage the technology, how you'll have to look beyond the conventional, shall we say, instruments of warfare, the conventional domains. We'll have to see as to how artificial intelligence, 5G, Internet of Things, drones, surveillance systems, cyber, these are the areas which we are currently focusing on. We want to leverage the immense innovation as well as the startup potential that we have in the country. So it is for us now to see as to how the technologies or the advanced technologies which are available in the commercial domain, how do they find military application? Not only how they find application, but how quickly. So we have put a system in place where we have our agencies which are interacting, engaging the academic institutes such as the IITs. We are encouraging, handholding the startups. We are handholding, engaging with the defense industry. And all this complements this aspect of Atmanirbharta, self-reliance. When you look at self-reliance for meeting our defense requirements, I highlight and I make it a point to say this, that self-reliance is not only in terms of acquiring new equipment or new weapon platforms, it is also in terms of our ability to sustain what we already have. So it includes ammunition, it includes spares, it includes maintenance requirements. So this is the entire, so in terms of what we are doing, this is one area which is engaging our attention, and we are laying a lot of emphasis on this.
I just want to ask a more current sort of question in the sense that, not that all this is not current, but India has faced the brunt of China's aggressive intent, especially across the line of actual control, and we've seen this in the last 4 years. There has been, of course, 21 rounds of commander-level talks? I think the last, that was just 3 weeks ago, you had the last round of border talks to diffuse the situation on the LAC. How would you describe the overall situation on the line of actual control with China?
Well, very briefly, if I were to sum up as to what the situation is, I would describe it to be stable, but sensitive. And this is where I think we need to keep a close watch, monitor very closely the activities across the LAC, both in the immediate, shall we say, depth and further behind. In terms of what are we doing, I would say upfront that our deployment in terms of the troops and other element that we have along the LAC is extremely robust. It is balanced. We also have, or we do maintain adequate reserves in terms of our infantry formations and other artillery and the other elements to be able to deal with any situation that may arise across the entire length of the LAC. So this is as far as our preparedness is concerned. There are 2 more aspects to it. I mentioned about modernization, tech infusion. We are making sure that to enhance our ability or capability on the borders, technology for surveillance, technology for precision targeting, for better communication, for better habitat. These are the areas we are leveraging it very well. While all this is happening, our focus on infrastructure development, be it the forward road connectivity, be it the strategic road connectivity in terms of connectivity towards Leh, so that in the future you would want and you would have an all-weather, all 12 months in a year connectivity, which always remained a challenge. And of course, road connectivity right up to the border. So these are the areas we are focusing on. But it is not, when you talk of infrastructure, it is not just the roads. It is also your helipads, your advanced landing grounds. It is also your communication infrastructure. So we are collaborating with the Ministry of Telecommunication. We've got close to 305 our military post where we'll soon have 5G connectivity. Likewise, in terms of power sector, we want green energy initiatives in the forward area. So we are collaborating with the Ministry of Power. So our aim is to collaborate, to work alongside other departments, other agencies, so that the infrastructure along the borders, along the LAC, that progresses well.
Just one quick question. I know, of course, probably the answer will be long. Is what are the lessons you think you've now, been in the saddle for several years? What are the big lessons you think we've learned from the various tussles or the conflicts that we've had recently at the border? What are the 2 or 3 big takeaways for you?
Well, not only what is happening along the borders,
Sure.
but I would say that there are very profound lessons that we need to learn from what is happening in terms of conflict around the world. And
Right.
these lessons are at the strategic level, at the operational level, at the tactical level. At the strategic level, I believe national security is gaining salience in the international system. And what it has shown is where national interests are involved, nations would not hesitate to go to war. Second, I believe in situations where you have contested borders, such as ours, the land will continue to remain a decisive domain of warfare. Third, we spoke of self-reliance. It has shown us not only the conflict, but also the pandemic time, the importance for us to become self-reliant, to have near zero dependency on ex-import requirements. At the operational level, the importance of non-contact warfare, we call it non-kinetic warfare, which I mentioned, the importance of cyber, the information space, the battle of narratives, the influence operations. These are some of the areas and at the tactical level, yes, it is more to do with how we do business when we employ our armor, infantry, artillery, etc., long-range precision fire. So these are some of the areas which we are currently focusing on. And I believe all the lessons we need to see in our context. So these cannot be templated, and I think we are doing good in this direction.
Thank you, and I'm hopefully come back to you at if there's time that you have. But let me turn to Admiral Lanba. And Admiral, the Navy has probably the biggest role to play in terms of the Indo-Pacific region, especially if India is to be a net security provider for the region. Now, what do you think the Navy needs to do to fulfill the mandate that's there, given the fact that generally the Navy is treated as the poor cousin to the other 2 armed forces in terms of resources? Where would you say you need to emphasize? What are the things you would want us to do?
Thank you for inviting me. Before I answer your question, let me lay down some context to it. The Indo-Pacific is in focus because of the growth of the national power of China, and especially its maritime power. She has numerically the largest navy in the world, the PLA Navy. At the moment, about 375 ships. She has the largest Coast Guard in the world, the largest maritime militia, the largest ocean-going fishing fleet. China constructs close to 42% of merchant ships in the world. 7 of the 10 largest ports in the world are on the Chinese coast. Its productivity of its shipyards is unmatched in the world. Since 2005 to 2023, the PLA Navy has added 112 ships to its orbit, which is larger than the next 10 navies put together. That includes the United States Navy, the Indian Navy, Japan. You can take the other navies put together. She has at the moment about 25 odd percentage of merchant marine under Chinese flag. And this percentage is slowly and steadily only growing. She's changed the status quo in the South China Sea, reclaimed those islands. She said she's not going to militarize them. She's militarized them, constructed 3,000 meters plus airfield on each of those 3 islands. So she is a maritime power to be reckoned with. Now, you talked about the Indian Navy being the Cinderella service, silent service and all that.
Yeah.
What do we need to do? We need to invest in a holistic national maritime power. I'll come to the Indian Navy last. The percentage of Indian trade being carried in Indian flag bottoms has been reducing over the years. Indian shipping industry, I don't agree with what the Army Chief said, is in the doldrums. We have less than 1% of global ship construction within India. You have the defense shipyards which are doing well primarily because they have a captive customer in the form of the Indian Navy. But all the other large shipyards which had capability of constructing larger merchant ships have all shut down. That's one. Next is there has been a focus in the last 10 years. You have the Sagarmala project to develop ports, infrastructure and linking them to the hinterland. But our economy is growing. It's a globalized economy, entirely dependent on shipping of goods. A very large percentage by volume and by value is transshipped by this thing. We are an energy deficient nation and will continue to be for the foreseeable future unless we find some great finds of gas and oil, and including blue. That. So we need to invest in merchant shipping construction within the country. We need to have Indian flag bottoms to carry the energy. Coming to the Indian Navy, we need to invest in capabilities. In blue water forces, I'm talking about destroyers and frigates, we need to urgently approve the construction of a true third aircraft carrier. Now I'm talking of a large aircraft carrier, not the light aircraft carrier of the Vikrant class. I'm talking of 65-ton along with the Catobar capability. Invest in nuclear submarines. Build up naval power. If you want to be counted as a regional power and be a net security provider, that is the way go ahead. But I want to make a point. Construction of naval power cannot be at the cost of the Army or the Air Force. The country needs to invest more in defense. We need to have a greater share of the GDP in defense. And that is the way ahead. Otherwise, we want to be a regional power, we need to play a role, we'll be found wanting.
Thank you. I just have a quick question for you, Admiral. The fact is that China, the cliche is the string of pearls, where it has occupied or at least gained control of a lot of ports that's there. They also want to set up bases in very critical areas around the Indian Ocean. India has, of course, tried to counter it, and I think the word that is being used is a diamond necklace around there. This is, of course, one of them was looking at coastal radar surveillance equipment. We saw what happened in Maldives and the fact that, there's been a setback in terms of, whatever we're planning to do there. How serious is that setback? And how is, if you have to move in this direction of having eyes there, looking at, we of course had a good agreement with Mauritius on this. How would you say we should proceed on these matters? And how severe is the problem, caused by what is happening in Maldives?
I'll answer your question in 2 parts. One is sustainable in operations of the Indian Navy in the larger Indo-Pacific. And next is, like the Army Chiefs talked about, maritime domain awareness and what we have done. What the country and the Navy has done is we have identified a number of OTR ports that are operational refueling transfers and all that. And the Navy puts in, so the legs have increased. We've now set up the facility in Agalega in Mauritius. Similarly, we have agreements with other countries also. We have signed all the foundational agreements with the United States. So the reach and sustainability of the Indian Navy has increased. This is not something new. Like when I was commanding my destroyer way back in 2005, we had a fuel exchange agreement with the United States. So when I was deployed in the Atlantic, I fueled from a US tanker in the Mediterranean. So similarly, we have this exchange. The Indian tanker, if it's available, can fuel a US naval warship at sea, and you settle your accounts. This happened way back in 2005 itself. So now with the logistics agreement in place, so the reach and sustainability of the Indian Navy has grown by leaps and bounds. And it is there to see what's happening now in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. As far as maritime domain awareness goes and what he's talking about, what has happened in Maldives and all that, systematically over the last decade, we have set up infrastructure, including in Maldives, a radar chain, Sri Lanka and Seychelles and Mauritius. We've helped other countries also. We've signed white shipping exchange agreements with over 20 countries and different organizations. So there is a holistic maritime domain awareness in the Indo-Pacific. We have the India International Fusion Center for IOR in Gurugram. And the IOC-IOR publishes a weekly, a fortnightly report for everybody. We have agreements for sharing intelligence with a number of partner countries. So there is a holistic domain awareness of what is happening in the Indo-Pacific. Like whenever a Chinese ship sails, we know where it is, when it's going to enter Indian Ocean, and more often than not, she is welcomed by a ship or a maritime patrol aircraft saying, "Welcome to the Indian Ocean region." It's happened in the past and it's happening now. So we are much better prepared, knowledgeable, with inputs available to operate, and I think we can meet the challenge, especially in the Indian Ocean region.
I'm going to come back to you, Admiral, on this, but let's bring in Air Chief Marshal Bhadauria on this. They say that the next war will be virtually fought. In the sense, cyber will take charge. And even before you can marshal your troops or your fleet or whatever it is, you could be defeated. As we've seen in Russia, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, within days, Russia had knocked out the Ukrainian surveillance systems and was, had full control over the air. So how do you see this playing out in the Indo-Pacific? What are India's capabilities in case there is, cyber fire or whatever terminology that we use to describe the way we could be defeated on that front, the technological front? How do you see India proceed on that front? Do we have the capability already, or what do we need to do to build it?
I think from cyber perspective, I think with the context of threats and opportunities and what has been laid out very clearly, this is where China is really into an asymmetric growth, both in cyber and space, and we should look at cyber and space together for this. Firstly, to add on to whatever areas of opportunities or development that we are looking at, I will just go towards that side, that apart from maritime domain awareness, we need to quickly transform to air and space domain cooperation, collaboration, awareness, ability to collaborate and share. Easier said than done whenever different forces are involved. Okay, so that needs to be tackled. And the biggest threat to that is the cyber. And in cyber, China is really leaps and bounds ahead. Where we are, I won't really go into it because of obvious reasons. But what we need to do is to really develop this to the next level. And technology is the answer. We need to, all these issues that we are discussing, apart from Atmanirbharta drive that is really putting our defense industry on the right pillar to support where we are heading, the technology growth in the new age requirements is where we need to take leadership. Cyber is one, space is one. in cyber, therefore, and in space assets, when we see ISR and complete nav and support requirements, you need to bring in AI, ML, you need to bring in quantum tech. Without quantum security, you cannot really target or solve the cyberspace security issues. So these are areas from Indo-Pacific perspective, I think, we, from technological perspective, can do a lot. These are the new tech. We need to take leadership in this. This is where our industry needs to concentrate. This is where it is kind of still open space for us to become leaders. Because let us not forget, whatever is happening on the global front, the Chinese military potential or its growth is so asymmetric in the region, and we'll be the front end of bearing that asymmetry. Whatever happens on the global front. So if we have to safeguard and continue to grow and see our security concerns correctly, I think technology growth and technology sovereignty is the answer. And that is an area which will tackle all this. Cyber being one of the very important areas. And I'll discuss some of those other issues. Apart from cyber, for example, when I said air and space domain, we need to be able to communicate and transfer data with all our strategic partners whom we identify as part of COAS or as part of other strategic partnerships, bilateral or multilateral. So these are the areas that we need to look at. We cannot put our entire information on the net, but how do we share the relevant information? We need to maybe start with HADR kind of template and have ability to put our strategic reach assets for whoever requires. And that will really initiate the point of how do we come on the same net in terms of comm, data, ability to talk to each other when required. So these are my opening remarks in response to you and any other thing that.
Sure, I'm going to come back to you, Chief Marshal. Let me get Ambassador Nirupama Rao, our former secretary, into this. Now, China has been pushing to resume broad bilateral relationships with India, setting aside the border crisis. I mean, that's the thing. And India has maintained that normalization is not possible if the border situation remains abnormal. I mean, that's India's stand. Now, there is every danger that this relationship could deteriorate further. And if you saw the morning papers today, they talked of the US intelligence reports that says that there is a possible conflict going to happen between India and China if things worsen. How do you see, where do we need to move forward with China? What are the things we need to do? You've been an ambassador to China as well. The things that we need to do, and what are the red lines or things that we should draw, and where can we make the relationship, as we say, more manageable, predictable, rather than being surprised constantly by China?
Well, first of all, Raj, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this very distinguished panel. We haven't used the D word in our conversation so far, and I refer to diplomacy. But when it comes to the current state of relations between India and China, you wonder where diplomacy has gone. For 30 years, or even more than that, for almost 40 years, we maintained a certain management regime in our relationship with China. Peace and tranquility were maintained along the line of actual control. But it was a brittle relationship, as was proved by the events in Galwan and the consequences of that military confrontation. The Army Chief just spoke about the current situation along the line of actual control and the fact that tensions persist and efforts to reduce those tensions and to build more confidence in the relationship, or as the Americans would say, build a floor to this relationship, have not really succeeded so far. So to answer your question about the direction, the kind of azimuth for this relationship, where do you set it at the moment? I find it very difficult to answer that question, really speaking. And that is where I believe the whole horizon of the Indo-Pacific comes into the ambit of our discussion. Now, the Indo-Pacific, you spoke about the game of supremacy that is being played out in the region. I'm not sure if I see it in those terms or relating to those definitions. This is not a great game that we are playing out in the Indo-Pacific. I think countries such as India, members of the Quad with partners like the US, Japan, and Australia, we are seeking to create a new dynamic multilateralism in the region. We are trying to create more cooperative structures, more collaborative security for the region, which I think with the rise of China, the region has been concerned about. Because the Chinese seem to see the situation, on the one hand, they are dismissive or they display high anxiety about the Quad and the kind of relationships that India is building with fellow sister democracies, I'd like to say. And on the other hand, they try to see the world through the prism of their own definition of a global order, whether it's the civilizational structure, the community of shared destiny, in terms of global security, global development. They seek their own concept of the world order, which in a sense upends the rules-based order that we have subscribed to and that we have been followers of and that we have sought to really implement in terms of our diplomacy. And that is where I'd like to also bring in the structures of the Global South. When we speak of the Indo-Pacific, you know, I was just doing a head count of the countries which belong to the Global South, which are also a part of the Indo-Pacific. And I counted about 49 countries in the Indo-Pacific, which are members of the Global South. And this is where I believe countries like us within the Quad, even as we try to build structures of security, more inclusive, more resilient, more cooperative and more collaborative and less adversarial. At the same time, we seek to deliver global public goods to the Global South, as we did during the pandemic, during COVID, with our vaccine diplomacy, in the HADR work that we do. And here I'd like to bring in our neighborhood. We have a neighborhood first policy. The government of India speaks of it. And we can never divorce our neighborhood. There is no question of that. We're just a heartbeat away. Countries like Sri Lanka, I mean, if you are in a spaceship, Sri Lanka is just a heartbeat away, or Maldives is just a heartbeat away. And therefore, what we do in terms of our outreach, and also to correct the disinformation campaigns that may exist about India within our neighborhood, they're all challenges for our diplomacy today. So to answer your question, the world is a very complicated place today. It's a difficult place today. The relationship with China having gone south, literally, as far as we are concerned, as it has for the United States, although I believe since the United States is 10,000 miles away from China, it feels the heat much less than we do. We share this 3,488 kilometer long border or line of actual control, however you define it, with China. And every day the news that comes in is concerning about the LAC and what the future holds for this relationship. And therefore, the contours of the relationships that we build in the Indo-Pacific, in many ways, I believe, are being determined by the contradictions, by the conflict, by the confrontations that we face with China today.
Okay, I think we're just going to take a bit of that. Chief, I hope you can stay a little longer. Oh, great. I'd like to get in Asha Motwani into this, Jadeja, sorry. The economic component of the entire process. I mean, we talked of the initiative in critical and emerging technology, which of course we'll get Taranjit and Sandhu to speak about that. But from your point of view, being a venture capitalist, given the fact that critical, we talked of cyber supremacy that could happen, what are the 3 or 4 things that you think India should be doing, and how could we leverage what we have in Silicon Valley to give us the kind of capability we need?
So I think, the defense tech is a new area in venture capital. This is not something that we have, been actively investing in simply because it was never a necessity. The reason that we are now, even venture capital world is beginning to look at defense tech, including things like drones and autonomous warfare and things like AI, of course. The reason we are looking at all that now is because we are realizing that we are on the brink of a very uncertain world, a world where we don't know where the Middle East conflict is going. We don't have any boundaries of where Russia is heading as far as Ukraine goes, and we don't know if China is going to follow through on its promise of taking over Taiwan at some point. I mean, it's promising that it will do in 2047, 48. So there is so given all these sounds and given the uncertainty that Ms. Rao was just talking about, I think the VC world is finally looking at this opportunity and saying, what can we be doing? And I think one of the biggest areas that I see happening is on AI, not simply because it's of course a path-breaking technology, it's a revolution, but because it is going to be the largest source of power. It's going to be, power is defined as a combination of wealth and the sort of the population size that you have. We have the population size. What we don't have is the wealth. And I feel that the AI opportunity is so huge right now that if the government did not get in the way, or if the government simply got out, I think India has the potential to really, and I don't mean Modi government. Modi government is actually much better than any other previous governments we've had. The Modi government is probably the friendliest to business. But that said, I'm still horrified at the sounds that, I keep hearing from the government saying, oh, we are going to regulate AI. When you don't know what is AI, you don't know if, it's just, in the US where it's the birthplace of AI, we still don't know how to regulate AI, even the US, despite the fact that it's all based there. How is it that we in India are already announcing regulations that are going to be a bottleneck to our own founders? I'm scared for India. I'm actually scared that in India we are going to have the bureaucracy regulating AI, which is by far the largest source of power that India can have. No amount of missile and other technology is going to give that power. That power that India could get now very quickly is through innovation in AI. And we have the people, we have the open architectures, we have people who are already plugged into Silicon Valley. The Valley is interested in working with India. How do we get the government out of the way? And I don't mean, again, I mean the bureaucracy out of the way. So that for me, that's the thing. We are ready to invest. Everybody wants in on India. We have the people here. We've invested in regular enterprise software companies. But defense and AI, and that also includes autonomous warfare, by the way. So in these areas, how do we come in fast? How do we invest and not run into so many obstacles? So, sir, all of you who are in the, in the defense, Mr. Lanba and everybody, this is our request to you from the US, that you need to play that active role in making sure that there is freedom to invest in India, freedom to work with the Indian startups, and that we don't have these AI noises that the bureaucracy is making. And it's a request to all of you, actually, Mr. Lanba and all of you, to be making sure that you are lobbying for us, for the freedom for us to invest here without bottlenecks.
Well, that's frankly said, and this segues well to get Taranjit Singh Sandhu into this. You've had a highly successful stint as the US ambassador. You've had a big deal being signed. Taranjit, when you look at how US and the fact that we are an integral part of the Quad, how has the Quad moved forward? Has it really delivered on what it is? Or there is this criticism that it's still largely a talking shop. Is that the past, or is that continues as of now?
Thank you, Raj, for having me, and my former boss, Foreign Secretary, the three chiefs, and of course, Asha with all the spies, have touched upon a lot of areas, so I don't really need to repeat that. And I'll answer your question on Quad, and along with, I also want to touch upon 4 other aspects of what is US-India partnership, and it also touches on Indo-Pacific. And I've used the word partnership because the relationship has transformed into a partnership. It's not just a cliche. And I want to give you very simple examples which we see, but sometimes we miss out. First area I would say is healthcare. Because of COVID, there's been a lot of focus. You know, the affordable healthcare part, India is playing a significant role. If you go to any of the pharmacies in US today and you buy the fever medicine, turn it around and you'll see made in India. Similarly, in vaccines, Ambassador Nirupama Rao will recall there's a vaccine called rotavirus. This was before India started the bulk production, it costed about $65–70. After India started the bulk production, that is in collaboration, the cost came down to $1. And together we were able to give it to Africa, Latin America, etc., etc. Similarly, so many aspects of healthcare can be touched upon. You mentioned about IT. It was somewhere AI was touched upon, but look at IT, digital, startup, innovation. I mean, I'm running across, I'm not going, any of those we can go into. ISET, what is emerging technology or critical technology, whether it's cyber security, Internet of Things, quantum, AI, all of that, huge scope. And the ISET importance particularly in the US-India context, because this critical emerging technology has also come into Indo-Pacific through the Quad. The importance here was that for the first time from the Indian perspective, when NSA was in the US last year, both the governments, the private sector and academia got involved. And just to answer in something what Asha mentioned, so further if you look at Prime Minister Modi's visit to United States, the state visit, there was an event which was hosted in the White House where prominent industry leaders from both sides participated. I think the industry-government linkage is going to ensure that this goes further, irrespective of bureaucracies or etc., etc.
And Quad, what is your assessment of it?
So, Quad, if you see, that's one of the areas in the United States, even today, it has bipartisan support. During President Trump's time, it took off, and you saw during President Biden's time, despite the COVID, we have had a number of Quad summits, we have had a number of virtual interactions, and it has touched a number of areas what I have been touching upon. And one area I wanted to mention is education and knowledge partnership. Now, that's very significant. You have heard of the 100 Quad scholarships, and it was amazing for me to see when Secretary of Commerce hosted a reception and two of the Indian representatives were there. One of the girls was from actually one of those slum areas. She had grown up in Mumbai, and she's a Quad scholar today. So the kind of knowledge and education partnership, and do remember in this that yes, we talk of demographic dividend, but India today, 50% of the population is 26 years and below, at a time when most of the world powerhouses, including the European ones like Germany, are aging. So look at the opportunity. Therefore, if appropriate skills, and that was one of the first events which Prime Minister Modi attended with Mrs. Biden, the First Lady, was skilling. So this aspect has been brought into Quad. So Quad is not just strategic. I think if you look into the healthcare has come in, you saw BioE combining with other partners and supplying in Southeast Asia. IT digital startup, all is very much there. Education, I have given you an example. Then energy. You are aware that we have huge energy requirements. So when First Solar is coming into Chennai and investing, it's sending a message. And similarly, semiconductors. All of us are aware of semiconductors. It's the buzzword. Everybody knows of the fab, the ecosystem. But semiconductors require a huge trained people. And the fact that Micron is coming into India and investing, it's also pointed towards that. And semiconductors is also an initiative in Quad. So I'll stop there.
Right, no,
Otherwise I can
I'm
go
there.
on and on.
Rudra, I know you've been waiting very patiently. And to take off from where Taranjit had said in terms of the Quad, he seems quite happy with that it is on all these other areas. Strategic is one of the components. But initially, I mean, the idea of Quad was in some senses, India was cherry to have made it the strategic part of it because it wanted to balance its relations with China. Do you think, in doing that, we have diluted the Quad to the point of where there are many forums to discuss all these other issues? Why is this, why is Quad being sort of pushed into that direction and not really confronting directly the threat that China faces on the security and defense front?
No, thanks, Raj, and thanks for having me here. Before I get on the Quad, I just want to challenge one thing that Asha said. We wouldn't want her to be an agent of misinformation back in the valley. On AI, frankly, Asha, I'm not sure where you're getting the sense that the Indian government is looking to regulate or over-regulate AI without understanding where AI is at. If you want regulation, I would say look to Europe. If you want regulation, in fact, look to the United States. It looks to us as that I'll come to that, is the executive order that was put out in the United States, for instance, the downstream effects of that are going to have rules and regulations which will regulate AI. So my sense, at least from the outside as just a think tanker, is that actually it seems that the government is being quite cautious to try and understand what is the opportunity, what is the problem. Now, coming up to elections, you will have some reactions in terms of misinformation, disinformation in itself. But I don't think the government over here is looking to over-regulate AI at all. I think it's actually quite an innovative, quite a forward-looking position that they're taking. On the Quad, actually I take a different view, which is that rather than dilute the Quad, I actually think that the Quad's been enriched in 7 different areas which would not have happened if it didn't exist. And Ambassador Sandhu sitting right here. We all look at the Quad and say, leader summit. That is the pinnacle for media houses. When is the leader going to come, if the leader's not going to come? But there are 7 working groups in the Quad that are working throughout the year on areas from infrastructure to health to a range of issues. ORAN, 5G, right? So that's number 1. Number 2, are we seeing outcomes out of the Quad? Yes, now we are. We're seeing projects come into reality, right? Whether it's in health, whether it's in Fiji, whether it's distribution, whether it's vaccines, whether it's in the area of infrastructure in itself. And there are some very good examples of what the Quad's been able to do. But behind the scenes, what we're also seeing in the Quad, frankly, and perhaps that doesn't get spoken as much, you talked about cyber earlier, is the coordination when it comes to common standards, right? Is the ability of the Quad countries to actually be able to relay information to each other in real time when there's a cyber attack, right? So there are trust mechanisms, I think, that have been created, that have been shared. And I would actually say on the cyber side of the Quad, we've actually gone pretty far from our limited understanding, again, from the outside, right? Now, what can the Quad do in the future? I think there are a lot of things. But one kind of broader view, I'll say, is in many Quad conversations, whether it's on standards or whether it's on digital public infrastructure, which we are big champions of in India, there's a pushback in terms of saying, let's talk about principles and governance, right? There are some Quad countries which are constantly saying, listen, let's talk about principles, governance. Absolutely, we should. Good governance, good principles is the best deterrent to, frankly, the China challenge in the Indo-Pacific. That is the alternative that democracies can deliver, right? But at the same time, I think we need to keep in mind that while we are talking about principles and governance, the other side is building out, right? Now, you can disagree or agree on digital public infrastructure. Is it good, bad, competition, not competition? The other side is building public infrastructure. That is definitely not good. That we know for a fact, right? So I think if you're talking about what is the, is there an urge, does the Quad work? Absolutely. Has it been enriched? I think yes. Does it need to do more now to get into kind of actual projects and build out? I think there's an urgency that is required in that process. And hopefully when we host the Quad Summit here in the kind of last quarter of this year is what we are told, we'll see some of those projects come out. I'm sure Ambassador Sandhu already knows what they are.
Thank you for that optimistic outlook. Since we have three chiefs here, I thought we'd ask a question. Given the fact that we just had in the morning that I'd mentioned earlier that there is US intelligence feels that there could be a conflict between India and China pretty quickly. How different, General, may I start with you and then I'll come to Admiral Lanba and Air Chief Bhadauria. How different, in case we go beyond a border conflict, how different would our response be? We do remember 1962. How different would that be if it does come, push comes to shove in on the border, as well as if there is a war that breaks out with China?
I mentioned initially and briefly in my comments to say that we do plan for different contingencies, and for each contingencies the responses would be different. So I would not want to get into the specific as to what the responses would be, but leave it by saying that our current deployment, our current defensive posture is robust, and we do have response mechanisms for different contingencies that may arise, which also will be equally robust, equally effective. And while what is happening on the border is important, we also need to keep a close watch, monitor what other developments are taking place in terms of infrastructure, in terms of movement of troops, concentration of troops, etc. So this is a constant process, and not only the military, but in consonance with other intelligence agency at the strategic level, we have all the wherewithal. So it is for us to put it all together to make sure that we are neither strategically surprised nor tactically surprised. So that is the key, and that is what we are.
And certainly our responsibility far different from what 1962 was. We all,
of course, the response will be effective, and it will be in
your mics.
To what situation that comes about. So I'll leave it there, and
I know.
Want to go beyond that.
Yeah. Admiral Lanba, how would you respond to a question like that?
You look back independent India's history, all the wars which you have had, whether you take 47, 48, 62, 71, 65, 71, we have never initiated the conflict. The conflict has been thrust upon us. So even now, it's very unlikely that we will going to initiate a war with China. In my personal opinion, neither side, neither China, neither India, wants to go to a full-blown conflict and coming to blows. So I don't agree with this assessment of the US intelligence agencies that there is going to, in my opinion, there is not going to be a war in the short term, medium term. In case a conflict is inflicted on us, I'm quite sure we are much better prepared along the LAC and Indian Ocean to give China a bloody nose. And I'll leave it at that.
And we did, of course, General, demonstrate that when they made the border intrusions and we pushed them right back on that front. In terms of the issues, and I'm going to come to you, Chief, for your assessment, but I just wanted a quick assessment on that. There have been issues on the Eastern Front we saw last year. That has become a bit hot. Where can we move for, where is this going to head to? If it's not going to head to war, where do you see the position between India and China? And what does China really have to do so that we can get back, move away from eyeball to eyeball confrontation in all these places?
You mentioned and spoke of the 21 rounds of talks that we had at the ground forces commanders level. You have a similar mechanism at the diplomatic level in terms of the WMCC. We've had 14 rounds of it post what happened in the middle of 2022. And during these talks, that is precisely what we are trying to achieve. How is it that you try and reach a amicable and mutually acceptable solution? And our attempt has been to, of course, to begin with, to get back to the status quo ante. And I think till the time that happens, And it is, I think it's only through talks, through dialogue that you'll try and reach there. Till then, I think our preparedness, our deployment will have to be robust, and that is what, while you continue to talk, we cannot let your guard down and be ready at all times, and that is what is we looking at, or that's what we are looking at.
Let me come to Air Chief Marshal and your answer to that question. If tomorrow China does decide to move the ball further into a war, what do you think India's response would be like?
Okay, I don't want to go into whether whose assessment happened or not happened. Should we be prepared? 100%. Yes, we have to be. What will happen? It is no longer 62. 62 will never happen again. This much I can tell you. We are way beyond in our capability, in our will, and in our mindset. Way beyond. Is our current capability enough? I think we need to continue to build, because looking at the trajectory and the ground realities, and I think the new age weapons technologies is something we should quickly get onto. Autonomous vehicles, drones, unmanned systems, swarms, collaborative swarms, flying munitions, AI/ML, space assets, 24/7 eyes, and thereafter putting the right weapon. And we need to transform this new age tech. We shouldn't carry on building on a conventional. When we do Atmanirbharta, new R&D, we have to change the scene for the future. And that is one area of immediate, I think, attention. And I don't know whether you'll come back to me again, so I want to just make a comment on AI.
This time, don't worry.
Okay. But if you permit, I'll just, on AI, I wanted to mention, ma'am, I've been, interacting a lot with the industry. And the most critical, firstly, this initiative taken by the government, huge. I think things will happen now. It was about time. But the most important aspect for AI in the country is that it needs to be homegrown. There are issues that unless it is homegrown, unless there is indigenous development, the IPR stays here. It will not, in some of the civilian system is fine. Anything developed by any of the stalwarts in the West would apply. But in many of the critical and all security related application, the AI element has to be homegrown. Okay, there are applications of it, fine, but that element must be ensured. And if the venture capitalists come into India with that mindset, I can connect you with so many people, so brilliant minds in the country who are just waiting for investment and who are really looking to grow in this field. So AI, we need to be a little careful. I think it's the most misunderstood concept and misquoted. This is the power of the future. I totally agree. But we need to harness it, and we need to take ownership of it, wherever it is critical. In some non-critical areas, it's okay.
Thank you. I want to come to, yes, I was going to come to you, Nirupama. Take a look at the fact that what we are discussing in terms of it, and the general mentioned that diplomacy, right? Just not the defense forces, but diplomacy has to succeed. If diplomacy has to succeed, are we going the right way? What more can we get into this picture so that we can get China back to the positions that we want, or more predictable, or more manageable relationship with it?
I think today diplomacy works very closely in tandem with what we do in the defense sector, what we do in terms of promoting the national security. And when national security is threatened, I suppose there are no holes barred, really. We have to defend those interests. We haven't used another D word here today. That's deterrence. And even as we pursue diplomacy, which we have to, I'm not saying it in the context of China alone. There, I suppose, the total erosion of mutual trust has made the conduct of diplomacy with China that more difficult. But I don't discount the need for the continuation of talks at the military commanders level, or within the WMCC, or for that matter at the foreign minister level, to see how we can reduce tensions and wind them down to some extent. As I said, build the floor to this relationship. But when it comes to deterrence, and it combines with diplomacy, and I think creates quite a potent force for us. Firstly, because India's place in the world is so much more prominent today, and our potential is so much more acquiesced in and recognized today by our friends and partners and in the larger world beyond. I think the deterrence capabilities that we build through our partnerships with the United States, with like-minded democracies, with our friends and partners, apart from the capabilities that we build within the country, which is what we talk of when we speak of Atmanirbharta and Make in India, Make for India, and particularly where the defense production industry is concerned. And that's where technology comes in and all the cutting edge, critical and emerging technologies that we seek to bring to the country in terms of our partnership with countries like the United States. So to answer the question, is war with China inevitable? You know, coming back to the initial query, you know, war is not a word to be trifled with. One must understand that. We are a country of 1.4 billion, and there are 1.4 billion lives at stake here. It's the destiny of 1.4 billion lives that you have to think of. And that is where I think you have to deploy, you know, your strength, your agility, your creative forces. And, you know, the Prime Minister speaks of our being a civilizational state. China and India are both civilizational states. And for civilizational states in Asia, you know, Deng Xiaoping, when he met Rajiv Gandhi, spoke of the Asian century. Today we are speaking of an Indo-Pacific century. China wants to be central to this story. That cannot happen. It has to be a diversified, pluralistic, democratic order that you think of within the Indo-Pacific. And that is really where the contradictions come up also between India and China. But, you know, as I said, we are neighbors and we have to deal with each other. And in the long run, I think it is most essential that we seek to reduce the differences between us. It's going to take a long time. But in the meantime, as they say in old world terminology, we have to maintain the line. We have to maintain the line.
And, you know, you touched upon U.S. relations and how important it is. Taranjit, let me just get you into this. We see, you know, that the drone deal is almost done, the Predator drones. Today we saw some developments on that front. How is our partnership with U.S.? And U.S. talked in its Indo-Pacific document in 2022, Joe Biden talked of us being a major defense partner and the need to advance that considerably. How much has the U.S. advanced that? How much have they helped us in terms of equipping ourselves to deal with the Indo-Pacific region? I mean, not just our region here.
Raj, our region is very much part of the Indo-Pacific. And I think our understanding is very clear.
I take that back, yes.
And Indian Ocean, when we talk of, we in fact, as Ambassador Rao pointed out, that there are several other countries and also about India's unique role. You saw it during G20, that bridging role. That's because ultimately the problems of global south need to come in. And now your question about, I think the Indo-Pacific, the Quad, to use American parlance, is a win-win strategy. And that's why I did not touch upon in the strategic side, because you have a line of experts who have already spoken on that. I wanted to just draw your attention. You know, even in a thing like vaccines, if the Quad did not move ahead and did not provide affordable vaccines to all the other countries, then you know who was there. It's no use saying that the efficacy is only 30% or 25%. If countries don't have a choice, they will take those vaccines. So that's why that BioE initiative and other areas which Rudra has touched upon, actually it is strengthening the Quad. Whether you say it's an alternative or not, but the countries need to have a concrete way of going ahead. But one aspect I want to mention here is that we must also keep in mind that, yes, when I said win-win, there is an economic, commercial push that is coming into our country too. When we are manufacturing vaccines in such a big way, there is employment being generated. when US investments are coming in, some of them which I named, or when cell phones are being manufactured in India, there are jobs being created. And, you know, the last 3-4 weeks I've spent in Amritsar. The tier 2, tier 3 cities in India have tremendous scope. Just connectivity in Amritsar can ensure existing food and vegetables and fruits. You know, you'll be amazed. Gobi, nashpati, you know, matar, all of them are already grown. And imagine if that is connected to Indo-Pacific or the other side, to the Gulf countries, how much the earning of farmers will go. 10 to 15 times. Will the issues that are bothering us today be relevant then? I'll just leave it there.
I think, Asha, you can come in now on this. He talked of the economic relations. Of course, if you'd like to rebut any of the points that our discussants had said about what you had commented, please feel free.
No, I think, listen, I think the relationship between US and India is at it is best it has been since, you know, for decades now, since independence actually. So there's no doubt in my mind that there is a push from both sides to increase the level of co-investment, to increase the level of foreign direct investment, to work on research collaborations and setting of standards and so on. So these are all very good developments. India is doing fantastic in the global south and taking leadership on various matters in Africa and other continents, in Latin America and so on. I think the only sort of, one of the things that I get little concerned about is that are we grabbing the opportunities which are on our table fast enough? This is the only thing that I feel that we could be accelerating our participation in that, we're removing obstacles on that. And I see nothing but a future where especially between the free countries, between I2, E2, and some of these corridors that are coming up now, I do see that there's going to be an increase in the wealth in all these pockets. And I2, E2 is the India, US, Israel, UAE partnership, which is very likely to happen. I actually have been sort of trying to connect the dots on what could be happening. And there could be actually a canal that passes through, might be bypassing the Suez altogether. There is that development also likely to be happening. And so there are some extremely positive, optimistic vectors in place. If we are the only ones who are going to be responsible for our slowness if we do. And that said, I just want to respond to Rudy about the AI thing. Rudy, I do understand. I think the West doesn't understand that India sometimes makes noises which are meant for public consumption domestically. Like for example, for elections, there are things that India will say which appeal to the masses, which appeal to various pockets, but but the West doesn't understand. So, for example, I was referring to this, this newspaper article that came out maybe about 10 days ago or so, where it was announced by India that there's going to be a set of regulations on AI, and I think maybe it was just a pacification of certain groups. I'm not sure. It could be domestically, targeted. So, and we'll talk about this. We'll talk about this more.
I actually want to get Rudra in on a different this thing. You look at the army chief had talked in his opening remarks about opening insights about the fact of the situation in the Gaza and moving right up to the Red Sea that's there. Do you see, given the fact that U.S. has its interest waxes and wanes. We saw what happened in Afghanistan, and they moved out, and we found ourselves in a bit of a pickle over there as well. How do you see this particular region play out, and what concerns should India have in the Indian Ocean as well as apart from the Indo-Pacific itself?
No, so if the question is on the US and where the US will go,
yes, where will they go? That yes, okay. Exactly.
So I've got this may sound very self-interested, but my view is very clear: is we have good relations with the US. In fact, at the moment, I'd say we have excellent relations with the US. We should get from the US what we can, when we can, and do more with the private sector in the US, which is what ISET is designed to do. That will then have a life of its own. So my own sense is, I think one thing we've seen in the last 25 years is the US will do whatever it does. If there's a new administration in the US that decides to take the war in Ukraine in a different direction, it'll take it in a different direction. Will that have a ripple effect on us? Yes. There are 2-3 things that I think are worth highlighting. One, my own sense is, as far as the US is concerned, there is an urgency to the relationship because of other factors, but there's also an urgency to the relationship because of bilateralism. ISET is producing results today. Whether it's Micron is then pushing a Taiwanese company to say, hey, listen, actually pretty good idea to invest. Tata's in bed with them, so on and so forth. We're seeing some movement on intersects in the defense side. We'd like to see more deals, for instance. We'd like to see the startup ecosystem fire up. We're seeing some stuff on quantum, AI, so on and so forth. But the 2 things that I think are of concern is, if the US does take a position in the future in Ukraine, for instance, where does that leave us with countries like Russia? Right? And I think that's one question that we have to kind of figure out. You asked a question on 62. I'll give you one factoid. In 62, the Russians actually didn't help us at all because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. We signed our first MiG contract with Russia in the summer of 1962. They pushed it to the summer of 63. We had zero help from Russia, right? And actually, who were the countries who came to our assistance at that time, at some level, with munitions? It was the United States, and lo and behold, it was Israel that gave us mortar, right? So I think that's one equation. The second one is, I think for our consideration is, how does this US, China, Russia kind of triangle work out for us? And how does the China-Russia kind of position? And if you look at any of these geopolitical formulations, I think it's very clear that we have to hedge. How do we hedge? We hedge with countries that have the capabilities that we require. United States, France, Israel. Similarly, can we do more in the Indo-Pacific? The Quad provides some kind of rule-making in a very disorderly universe, right? In its own normative style. It's not hard rules, but it's harder than softer rules, right? And to take a step forward is that, can we use this, and this may sound a bit ethereal, can we use this also for global good? You know, while it's a doomsday scenario across the world, 2 big wars, but can we genuinely do more with the Quad for global good? Can we provide digital public goods in parts of the world that will help inclusion, that will help banking, taking individuals in Fiji and Tonga and Togo and Mauritius to the last mile? That's the positive architecture that can be created out of all this geopolitical hedging, which we shouldn't forget.
Yeah, and but let's also look at it as the fact that military might is playing a decisive role wherever it is being projected. And that comes to you, General. Because we talked earlier, and I'd asked you about this question of what is the role the Indian Army can play. It's largely geared towards continental conflict. But given the fact that we now have, and you had this you had this discussion with 35 other chiefs there, what is the role you see? How can India project the armed, particularly the Indian Army capabilities in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region?
I did mention of military diplomacy, and that's exactly, I sense you're referring to.
Yes.
In the immediate neighborhood, I think there is lots we can do in terms of our engagement with countries in the immediate neighborhood. But outside, I think the more we engage at forums for ideation, there was a mention made of a collaborative and a cooperative arrangement is another area we look at. Especially in the context of Indo-Pacific, HADR is another area where we
is it a code word to develop capabilities? The
yes,
disaster,
in terms of
relief and management,
interoperability of our systems to work together. We also have, in terms of defense exports, we are looking at, and we are already doing this, our ability to showcase the capabilities of the indigenous defense industry to our philanthropic countries with whom we carry out exercises. There is an aspect of soft power here through our exercises with the foreign countries, either where we go to them or they come here. We are also showcasing yoga, because that we believe is another area where we can. So these are some of the areas, and I think there is tremendous potential. A lot of countries want to learn more from us, especially in those areas, core competencies that we have great experience, be it in counterinsurgency, counter-terrorism operations, be it in high-altitude area operations, urban terrorism and the likes. So they are very keen. Just as we want to collaborate with other countries in niche, disruptive, critical technologies, learn more about AI, quantum, etc. So
you don't see on the gray zone, conflict zones, India, assisting in any way. Where do you see India's role in that?
that is very important.
Yeah.
Increasingly, I think the gray zone, not only in the military domain but outside, but I'll focus on what we're doing in the military domain. In terms of our capacity building, as to what is it that you require to effectively, shall I say, fight in the gray zone vis-a-vis a conventional war. Now, these are some areas. Our experiences to deal with situation on the border, I think this is a good example of how we need to prepare ourselves to manage the borders, to operate in this area without sort of achieving what we need to achieve, yet making sure that the situation does not get out of control, or you need to keep it below the threshold. So yes, there's good experience that we have both along our northern borders as long as along our western borders, just as we also have in the hinterland. So these are this is also one of the areas where our friendly countries, partners are extremely keen to learn from us.
Thank you. Admiral Lanba, let me come to you. The fact was that when the Quad, in many sense, earlier was thought to be of some sort of security arrangement, but when they found not just India, but ASEAN countries chary of it, we saw that US tied up with us, UK, to give Australia nuclear submarine capability. How do you see when it comes to us, and given the fact that we were talking of conflicts, whether South China Sea, Taiwan Straits, if India had to move forward and build the kind of capability, do you see there has been talk of collaborating with the French on this for nuclear submarines? Is this something that you think is viable?
See, in our collaboration with the United States, Ambassador Sandhu will also agree with me. One thing which they said that we can discuss any and everything, but the nuclear technology is off the table. Okay. United States, this is the first time that they have shared nuclear propulsion technology with a partner other than UK. Earlier it was only a common thing with United Kingdom. Okay. We have come a long way in developing nuclear propulsion technology indigenously also. But an option is there of collaborating with France to build SSNs is there, and I think France will be more than willing if we are willing to go down that route.
Are we willing?
The Navy is willing, but it's a policy, it's a larger issue of your relationship with Russia and what we have been doing with them in the past. They have given us access to technology and shared technology which nobody else has done in the past. So we have to keep the overall gambit. I mean, during my visit to France, when I went there as the naval chief, I was the first naval chief whom they took me on board one of the SSBNs. I visited the Barracuda class new SSNs being under construction at the Naval Group shipyard. So they are more than willing, but this will have to take a decision on this, taking out the overall geostrategic situation and what a collaboration, how is going to affect our relationship with Russia and with other this thing. And we should continue to pursue this with the United States because their nuclear propulsion technology is miles ahead of everybody else. You just need to fuel the reactor once in the life cycle of the submarine, that is over 30 years.
And since we're talking of collaboration, let me come to you, Air Chief. In terms of interoperability, I think that's the word that the Army Chief also used. How do you see we can work with other countries? Whether it's the US and Japan, Australia, France, where do we see our, not just on the air platforms, but other things. But let's look at, of course, at the combat aircraft and others.
Yeah, I think interoperable, whatever exercises we are doing now, okay, we are practicing interoperability, which is largely procedural in nature. Okay, we need to get to the next level where it becomes ability to use the network. For example, there is a surveillance platform, US surveillance platform. Can we get the data directly into our fighters? So that is the end game. Whether it can be shared fully, of course, they would be concerned. They would be concerned when our AVAX is flying with what we share. But we need to graduate to that. So that is why I think on interoperability, our basics are all set, but largely procedural. We operate with each other. Everything is good. But now we need to change the level and get to a common data. How to sort this out? On cyber, there have been many discussions. So this is the area that we need to look at. Also, if you really look at ISR and sharing this new SAT data and that domain, which you need 24/7 visibility, unless you are able to plug in and see immediately real-time data, it doesn't, in many cases, is no longer valid when you need it. So this is what we need to graduate with, not only, let's say, on Quad level, but all the strategic partners in the region. And in non-Quad level, there are areas in technology where we develop technology and we share that. The details and the small prints in how much and how is another matter.
Okay, I've got just, actually, we're almost out of time, but I'm going to take this liberty in taking about 6-7 minutes. We just planned that, General, if you don't mind. Just one quick fire round that we want, and we'll start with you, Asha. If there's one thing that you think we should be doing on the Indo-Pacific front, what would that be? The mic?
Okay, all right. If look, I'm going to be launching a small venture capital fund for ISET. Let's call it the India-US ISET fund. I want to invite the 3 generals here to be part of that.
You're putting your money where the mouth is.
Absolutely. And I need these 3, gentlemen to be part of this little fund. Help me, please, in identifying what we should be investing in. Right. Because remember, I'm Indian. I may be an American passport holder, but I also am Indian. I'm born and brought up in Ahmedabad. And this is my country, this is my motherland, and I'll give my life for it. So, please let's work together on this, okay?
Taranjit, what's your one big point?
So, Raj, you have been very influenced by American way of asking. That's why you asked this question.
I'm just interoperability.
I would just take a leaf out of what Rudra said.
Right.
That I think India can be a very important force for global good. And here I'm again pointing to the young in India. If we can skill them appropriately, there is so much they can contribute in India, US, Quad, Indo-Pacific, world over.
Okay. Let's go to Rudra that side and out of the box thought.
So outside of all the strategy and the critical tech, etc., get young people in the Indo-Pacific, not necessarily the US, Japan, that happens anyway. Get people in the Indo-Pacific from countries with a population of less than 20 million, 10 million. There are many. There are 75. Talk to each other, share ideas, bring them in what you may call laboratory of good ideas, and global good will happen.
Nirupama, you were there in China when China launched the BRI.
I wasn't.
Oh, you're just, I think, moved.
I'm pretty prehistoric.
Sorry, yes, I met you in 2008 over there in Beijing. But tell us, I mean, China has pushed its influence, the elite capture that it did through its various, initiatives that it's taken on in the BRI. What do you think India could do? I mean, that's my one big thing. If India had to do, what would that be?
I thought this was a rapid fire.
It is a rapid fire.
We talked of war, now we talk of rapid fire. Now you want me to be trigger happy, I think. But in any case, when it comes to alternative strategies for India, looking at what China is doing as far as the BRI is concerned. The BRI was launched around 2014-15. And there have been many lessons learned, not only by China, one can only hope, but also by the world and the recipient countries. I think the alternative model that countries like India and our sister democracies can offer is a far more resilient, far more transparent, far more rules-based, and far more humanist structure. whether it comes to development partnerships, whether it comes to skilling, whether it comes to skill development and training, infrastructure building. Ultimately, when the Indo-Pacific, if you were asking me to sum it all up in one word, what our approach is, it's about creating these countervailing coalitions. I'd like to stop.
Hey, Chief, to you. The fact is that drones have come in. You have Hellfire missiles. You have everything else. Is the fact that China has 3 times more combat aircraft than we do? Will that balance tilt? What is your thought on that? One sort of.
No, they have 3 times aircraft, but in the area of concern and area of responsibility, how much they can bring to bear, that is what we need to consider, and that we are calculating in our calculation. But where we go forward is where we utilize all these drones and UAVs and unmanned combat vehicles and the swarm tech, manned unmanned. That is the area we need to really.
You think that will fundamentally alter? You will not need manned combat aircraft.
No, you would need manned, but there would be a combination of manned, unmanned component continuing to growing. And there has to be an element of, combination of stealth and rest of the ISR issues. You need to develop this niche and capabilities which you can bring to bear without loss of life. And that, I think, can change the game. That is where we can be ahead.
And are we ahead?
We are in a reasonable position. We are not ahead.
Okay.
We should not mistake. But we are in a reasonably good position. In the tech that is being developed now and the energy in the private sector, there is no reason why we cannot get ahead. And that is what we need to look at.
Admiral Lanba, what would be the one big thing you would suggest?
Holistic development of national power, including military capability, where we can negotiate from a position of strength.
I like this. You never talk about being the Cinderella, but you sort of back everybody else. Army Chief.
I don't want to be parochial and say only the Indian Navy. So it's just holistic military capability where you give the diplomats a position to negotiate from a position of strength.
Army Chief, last word for you.
From my perspective, I think we need to be strong, because that is what is going to be deterring our adversaries, and that is what will ensure that your growth story or growth trajectory is not impeded or hindered in any manner. So, that's a larger thing of remaining strong and having that capability. It is also to do with the deterrence which Ambassador Rao spoke of.
Thank you for that strong capability and the fact that we've had a very, very strong panel. Let's give them a very warm round of applause for this. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.